The sound of a tense, rhythmic ocean swell and distant, ominous musical chords. Narrator, it was a confrontation that defied all logic of naval warfare. A single destroyer, barely 2,000 tons, against the most powerful surface fleet Japan had assembled in years. 5 battleships, including the largest ever built, their guns capable of obliterating the smaller vessel with a single salvo. This was not a battle. It was a death sentence. Yet, on the morning of October 25, 1944, in the waters off Samar in the Philippines, the USS Hirman and her crew would not run. They would not surrender. They would charge. This is the story of how one U.S. destroyer faced 5 battleships, and the miracle that followed. To understand the magnitude of their ordeal, we must first understand the men of the 1st Marine Division. By November 1950, these were mostly veterans of the brutal Pacific Campaign, men who had faced the fanaticism of the Japanese on islands like Guadalcanal, Peleliu, and Okinawa. They were tough, professional, and battle-hardened. They were commanded by the stoic and resolute Major General Oliver P. Smith. The strategic situation was one of breathtaking audacity and peril. United Nations forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, had pushed deep into North Korea, aiming to end the war by Christmas. The 1st Marine Division was the spearhead of the X-Corps advance, moving up a single, tortuous mountain road from the port of Hungnam to the Chosin Reservoir, a massive, frozen body of water surrounded by steep, snow-clad peaks. The first, chilling signs came on the night of November 2, with probing attacks and the eerie sound of bugles and whistles in the darkness. But the main blow fell on the night of November 27. As temperatures plunged to -35 degrees Fahrenheit, the Chinese launched a massive, human wave assault on the Marines' perimeter at WWII. The night erupted into a cacophony of violence. The deafening roar of mortar and artillery fire mixed with the chattering of Browning automatic rifles and the distinctive pop of M1 Garands. But the cold was an enemy that attacked both sides indiscriminately. Machine guns froze solid, their firing mechanisms jammed by congealed oil. Men had to urinate on their weapons to free the bolts. Batteries died in minutes, rendering radios, their lifeline to command, useless. The cold became a tactical weapon. Frostbite casualties mounted at an alarming rate. Men lost fingers to the metal of their rifles. Boots had to be constantly worked off frozen feet to prevent gangrene. The simple act of eating was a trial, canned rations froze solid, and men had to thaw them over pitiful fires, if they could be lit at all. Water in canteens turned to ice. Dehydration and exposure were constant, silent killers. By 1400 hours on the 28th, the order was given, the Marines at WWII would attack. Not to retreat, but to attack south, to break through the Chinese roadblocks and fight their way back to Haguruhi. It was an audacious plan. A fighting withdrawal against a numerically superior enemy, across treacherous, icy terrain, in the most severe cold any of them had ever known. What followed would be a masterclass in combat leadership, air power, and raw human endurance. The breakout from WWII began on December 1. The lead battalion, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, immediately ran into a fortified Chinese position on a hill overlooking the only road out, a dominant feature that would be christened Hellfire Valley. The Chinese were dug in on the high ground, pouring down a murderous fire of machine guns, mortars, and grenades. The situation was impossible. The column was stalled, taking devastating casualties. Every minute spent in the kill zone meant more men dead or frozen. The attack was faltering. The Marines were pinned down, and the entire breakout, the very survival of over 8,000 men, hung in the balance. This was the crisis. The moment where the division's fate teetered on a knife's edge. If they could not take this hill, the road would remain closed. The Chinese would tighten the noose, and the 1st Marine Division would be systematically destroyed, piece by piece, in the frozen hills of North Korea. At Haguruhi, the situation was equally desperate. The makeshift perimeter was under constant, heavy assault. The defenders, many of them cooks, clerks, and drivers pressed into the line as riflemen, fought with a ferocity that belied their lack of infantry training. The airstrip, General Smith's stubbornly built airstrip, was not yet operational. Without it, there would be no resupply of ammunition and, most critically, no evacuation for the thousands of wounded who were slowly freezing to death in the aid stations. The cold was now at its most vicious. The mercury plummeted to -50°F. Men's breath froze on their faces, forming masks of ice. To touch bare metal with a bare hand was to lose skin. The wounded, if not moved quickly, would simply die of hypothermia where they lay. Medical supplies, particularly morphine, were freezing solid, rendering them useless. The sheer, physical misery was unimaginable. Fear wasn't just of the enemy, it was a deep, primal fear of the cold, a creeping lethargy that promised a sleep from which there was no waking. In Hellfire Valley, the solution came not from a senior officer, but from a junior leader on the ground. Captain William E. Barber, commanding Fox Company of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, had been holding a critical pass for days against overwhelming odds. But here, the turning point was forged by a simple, heroic act. A young lieutenant, Robert P. Ray, stood up in the midst of the hail of fire. He turned to his men, his face a mask of determination against the cold, and yelled a single, electrifying word, attack. He then charged, alone, up the ice-covered slope towards the Chinese machine gun nests. Pause, for a heartbeat, his men were frozen, not by the cold, but by the sheer audacity of the act. Then, a roar went up. A wave of Marines, inspired by their lieutenant's suicidal courage, rose from their cover and surged up the hill after him. It was a bayonet charge, a tactic from a bygone era, executed with terrifying effect in the sub-zero temperatures. They overran the Chinese positions in hand-to-hand combat, clearing the hill and opening the road. Air support, and they were not alone. Overhead, a constant umbrella of air support provided by Marine Corps and Navy pilots, the famed Chosin Few, pounded the Chinese positions with napalm, rockets, and .50 caliber machine guns. These pilots flew in conditions ground crews deemed impossible, landing on makeshift strips to deliver vital supplies and evacuate the wounded. The airfield at Hagaruri finally became operational, and C-47 transport planes began a miraculous shuttle, bringing in reinforcements and taking out over 4,000 wounded and frostbitten men. This logistical miracle was the other half of the victory. The Marines, in a phrase that would become synonymous with the battle, began to advance in another direction. It was a fighting withdrawal, but every step of the way, they attacked. They seized the high ground, held it through the night against furious assaults, and then fought their way to the next hill the following day. On December 11, 1950, after 13 days of continuous combat and a 78-mile march from the Chosin Reservoir to the port of Hungnam, the last elements of the 1st Marine Division reached the waiting ships. They brought out their dead, their wounded, and their equipment. They were not a defeated force, they were a victorious army that had inflicted a catastrophic defeat on the Chinese 9th Army Group. The cost was staggering. The Marines suffered over 4,000 battle casualties and an additional 7,000 non-battle casualties, almost all from severe frostbite. But they had mauled the Chinese forces sent to destroy them. Estimates suggest the Chinese 9th Army Group suffered between 25,000 and 35,000 combat casualties, with thousands more succumbing to the cold. An entire Chinese army had been rendered combat ineffective. The legacy of the Chosin Reservoir campaign is profound. The 1st Marine Division's successful breakout preserved a core of veteran troops, saved the X-Corps from annihilation, and dramatically altered the course of the Korean War. It became an instant legend, a testament to the Marine Corps' ethos of never leaving a man behind. The heroism was recognized with an unprecedented 13 Medals of Honor awarded for actions during the battle, 7 to Marines, and the rest to soldiers and sailors of the attached units. Men like Lieutenant Ray, Captain Barber, and countless others became symbols of courage and leadership against impossible odds. They had not just survived the cold and the enemy, they had triumphed over both through training, tenacity, and an unbreakable esprit de corps. The battle for the Chosin Reservoir stands as one of the most epic tales of survival and combat resilience in modern military history. It is a story where the human spirit, tested by fire and ice, refused to break. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War and the conflicts that followed. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.